I was sitting across from a guy at a high-end cafe in London last week, the kind of place where the air smells like expensive roast and quiet desperation. By every 2026 metric, he was a winner. Top-tier consultant, perfect biometric health scores, and a portfolio that was green across the board. But as we sat there, his leg wouldn't stop bouncing. Every time his watch gave a haptic buzz, just a mundane calendar alert, his pupils would dilate, and he'd scan the room with this frantic, primal intensity. He told me he'd spent the last year on a radical happiness protocol, cold plunges, dopamine fasting, the whole 2026 toolkit. "I've done everything right," he whispered, looking at a notification about a minor market dip like it was a death warrant. "So why do I still feel like I'm being hunted? Why can't I just stay happy?"
Yeah.
What was fascinating wasn't his anxiety, but his absolute conviction that he was broken. He viewed his stress as a system failure, a glitch in his pursuit of a permanent state of zen. But as I watched him white-knuckle his espresso, I realized he wasn't malfunctioning at all. It was actually a masterpiece of engineering. His brain was doing exactly what it was designed to do 50,000 years ago when a rustle in the grass meant a predator, not a Slack message. We've spent the last century trying to hack our way into constant euphoria, treating our internal smoke alarms like they're the fire itself. But in a world that's moving at a velocity our biology never signed up for, our obsession with feeling good might be our biggest strategic error. What if the very thing we're trying to cure, that hypervigilant, stressed-out survival drive, is actually the only piece of software that can keep us standing in 2026? What if we've been optimizing for the wrong metric entirely? And that story, that visceral image of the guy in the cafe, it brings us right to the core of what we're doing in this deep dive.
It really does.
We are going to look at this phenomenon, this chronic stress, this endless modern pursuit of happiness, but through a lens I think a lot of people just miss.
The evolutionary psychology lens.
Exactly. So our mission today is a really deep exploration of this concept called evolutionary mismatch. This huge chasm between the human brain, which was, engineered for the Stone Age, and the world we actually live in, these high-volatility 21st century environments.
And we're going to break down how these modern settings are constantly overactivating our ancient survival mechanisms.
And crucially, we're not just going to describe the problem. We want to look at the strategies, the real comprehensive strategies we can use.
Things from, powerful therapy models all the way to how you actually design a workplace.
Right. For this environmental and psychological recalibration.
It's just such an essential framework. You really can't solve burnout or chronic anxiety if you don't first get why that stress response is so powerful, why it's so persistent.
The consultant you describe is the perfect case study.
He is. He's someone who has ticked every single box of modern success, yet he's in this state of profound distress.
Because of this evolutionary misalignment.
Precisely. And we have to start by acknowledging a really fundamental biological mandate of the human brain.
Which is?
It's simple. Survival over hedonic well-being.
Survival over happiness.
Always.
It feels like such a brutal evolutionary bargain, doesn't it? Prioritizing surviving a tiger over enjoying a watermelon.
It is brutal. Our core software isn't optimized for joy. It's optimized for not dying.
And you can see that in how our emotions work. Happiness it's fleeting, but anxiety, grief, those things are structurally sticky.
They are, because they breed what's called a burden of action to avoid repeat occurrences.
You learn more from pain than from pleasure. You remember the burn more than the warmth.
Exactly. And the evidence for that design, for what we call the negativity bias, is just overwhelming.
Okay, so let's define that. What is the negativity bias at its core?
The negativity bias is, it's the brain's highest priority security setting. It's the default program.
I like that analogy, a security setting.
Think of it this way. You're an early human, and you're out in a field. In that field, there are 99 delicious, safe watermelons.
Okay, sounds good so far.
But there's also one hidden tiger, a lethal threat. Now, which ancestor survives?
The one who's looking for the tiger, not the one picking out a watermelon.
The one whose amygdala floods their system with stress hormones, cortisol, and forces them to focus only on that one potential fatality. That's the one who survives, the one who reproduces.
So we are the descendants of the most anxious, paranoid ancestors.
We are the descendants of the vigilant. That hypervigilance, that deep tendency to prioritize threat detection, it's not a flaw. It's hardwired into us because it was a massive adaptive advantage.
So we have this architecture that is, from a modern point of view, almost pathologically wired to prioritize bad news.
The potential risk, the failure point, the one thing that's out of place.
We are built to find the single piece of grit in an otherwise smooth machine.
And that acute physiological response. the one designed for the immediate physical danger of a tiger attack.
That's now what a global economic slump triggers, or a tough quarterly review, or just an inbox full of emails.
It's the smoke detector principle, but on a global scale. A tiny whisper of market volatility sets off a 5-alarm fire in our biology.
Wow. And this survival focus, it's not just about our fight or flight response. It actually underpins some really fundamental psychological behaviors. Right?
Oh, absolutely. You see it most clearly in behavioral economics with loss aversion theory.
Explain that.
The theory just demonstrates empirically that we humans experience the psychological or emotional pain of a loss far more intensely than the pleasure we get from imperative game.
So losing hurts more than winning feels good.
Much more. The data suggests it's often twice as intense. If you lose $100, the psychological pain is double the joy you'd feel from finding $100.
So our minds are asymmetrical.
Completely asymmetrical. They just value negative outcomes far, far more powerfully than positive ones.
And that innate asymmetry, which is all driven by that survival mandate, that's the engine of modern chronic stress.
It is. Which brings us right back to that core concept we mentioned, evolutionary mismatch.
Let's define it properly.
Mismatch occurs when you place an organism, in this case us, into a novel setting that contrasts sharply with the environment of its evolutionary history.
The environment we were biologically engineered for.
Right. The mismatch is that massive chasm between our Stone Age firmware and our 21st century operating system.
And the nature of the stress is so different.
That distinction is critical.
Yeah.
Ancestrally, stress was acute, it was episodic. You either ran from the tiger, or you killed it, or it ate you.
But the event ended.
The event ended. The stress hormones went away. The system returned to baseline. Modern stress, though,
It's relentless.
it's non-physical threats.
Right. Things like abusive supervision, impossibly high performance targets, judgment on social media, financial volatility. But the brain, it triggers the exact same physiological stress response.
Identical. The one designed for immediate physical danger. This is why, for example, something like night shift work is so inherently damaging. It's fundamentally misaligned with the evolved natural rhythm of our biology.
So if the problem is evolutionary, the framework for the solution has to shift too.
It has to. And this has huge implications for entire fields, like, say, industrial and organizational psychology, IO psychology.
Oh, so?
Well, traditionally, they've been concerned with what are called proximate causes.
The how of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, how does abusive supervision lead to high job dissatisfaction and eventually employee turnover?
The immediate chain of events.
Right. Proximate causes look at that immediate mechanistic stuff. The boss yells, the employee gets stressed, the employee quits. Simple.
But evolutionary psychology pushes us to go deeper.
It demands we look at the ultimate evolutionary causes, the why.
Okay, so what's the why in that example?
Why do employees inherently dislike intimidating supervisors in the first place? It's not just because they're mean or unpleasant.
It's something deeper.
It's rooted in our evolved social dynamics. Specifically, our hardwired psychology around fairness and our deep primal expectation of what constitutes adaptive leadership.
So we don't just dislike bad bosses because they're inconvenient.
We dislike them because, on a primal level, an intimidating or unfair leader signals instability. It signals a threat to resources. It signals potential danger to the entire group.
It's an ancient threat signal.
Precisely. And if we understand that ultimate why, we can design workplace interventions that go so much deeper than just, surface level conflict resolution.
You move from treating the symptoms to addressing the root psychological architecture.
Exactly.
So we've defined the mismatch by these unrelenting novel settings. What's the real price of this continuous, nonstop, chronic demand of the modern era? Your consultant friend, he was reacting to economic news that was weeks away, but his body acted like the market dip was a physical punch.
The continuous nature of it all. That's the great differentiator, and it's devastating.
Because there's no recovery period.
As we said, ancestral stress allowed the body to stand down to return to baseline. Modern stressors, which are compounded by 247 connectivity.
The constant buzz of that watch.
And the expectation of an immediate response, they're continuous. Your body never, ever gets the all-clear signal.
So cortisol and adrenaline just stay elevated.
Far longer than the system was ever designed to handle. And it just takes this continuous toll on well-being.
And it's not just our cognitive load. The physical experience of work is completely mismatched, too.
Right. We evolved to maximize our energy gains while minimizing our energy expenditure. That's a core concept called optimal foraging theory.
Put simply, Get the most calories for the least amount of physical effort.
Yes. And this clashes just disastrously with modern life. We are now compelled to work in these sedentary office environments where the evolved bodily inputs we need,
Like standing, walking, sprinting.
using our bodies in physically demanding ways, are almost completely gone. Or we mandate night shifts, which, as we said, clash directly with our intrinsic biology, suppressing restorative hormones and making us vulnerable to disease.
The body is basically screaming at us that this environment is fundamentally wrong.
In very, very clear terms.
And the consequences for organizations they're impossible to ignore.
Oh, they're massive. You see increased absenteeism. You see medical claims skyrocketing for stress-induced conditions. You see deep employee disengagement. And of course,
Burnout.
the widespread phenomenon of burnout that is plaguing every single modern industry. This evolutionary misalignment is now being recognized as a major, major contributor to all of those debilitating challenges. It places a huge economic and human burden on everyone.
Okay, so let's unpack this misalignment even further, because it's not just about the volume of stress, it's about the quality of the stimulus we're getting.
Yes, and this is where the concept of supernormal stimuli comes in. And it is truly, truly wild.
Supernormal stimuli, it sounds like something out of science fiction.
It does.
Yeah.
But it provides the perfect explanation for how the modern world so effectively bypasses our rational thinking brain and just hits those ancient unthinking survival buttons directly.
It's like a biological shortcut, a hack.
It's a biological trick. So the formal definition is, an SNS is an exaggerated version of a naturally occurring stimulus.
Okay.
And it elicits a response that is far stronger than the natural stimulus for which that response originally evolved.
Think of it as sensory bait.
Perfect analogy. Organisms evolve these predictable tendencies to favor certain things: color, size, patterns. And when you offer them an artificial, hyper-exaggerated version, they will choose the artificial one over the natural one.
Even if that choice is ultimately bad for them, maladaptive.
Even then, especially then.
And this idea, it came from ethology, right? The study of animal behavior, which gives us these really vivid classic examples.
Exactly. The term was coined by Nico Tinbergen, a Nobel laureate, through his research on herring gulls.
Right, the gulls.
So herring gull chicks, they instinctively peck at this little red spot on their parent's bill. That's the cue for the parent to regurgitate food.
Okay, a natural stimulus response.
Right. But Tinbergen tested their response to something that was clearly not a parent's head. A simple red knitting needle with 3 white bands painted on it.
Just a stick.
Just a crude stick. And what do you think happened?
They pecked at it more.
They pecked at it more vigorously. This crude, non-representational model elicited a stronger response than an accurate 3D model of the parent's actual head and bill.
Why? What was it about the stick?
The exaggerated color contrast, the simplified shape. It was a more effective trigger for that evolved pecking mechanism than reality itself. The fake beat the real thing.
So a simplified, exaggerated signal can actually override the full context of reality.
It can.
Yeah.
And you see this irresistible, often maladaptive response all through the natural world.
Which brings us to the rather hilarious example from the insect world.
The Julodamorpha bakewellie beetle in Western Australia. Entomologists observed these male beetles attempting to copulate. Not with female beetles.
But with beer bottles.
With discarded brown, stubby beer bottles.
A beer bottle. I mean, because it's brown and has some texture. That's commitment.
It is. The bottles are textured, they're oversized, and they have this specific reflective sheen that just, it exaggerates the features of the female beetle to such a degree that the male's primal sexual urge is completely hijacked by this artificial object.
So the bottle is a perfect supernormal stimulus for procreation.
But a complete failure for actual reproduction. And this highlights the crucial point. The creature is spending vital energy, its reproductive drive, on a biologically useless endeavor.
That analogy with the beetle, it makes the stakes feel kind of low. It's a funny story.
It is.
But when you apply that same maladaptive principle to us, to the human experience, the stakes become incredibly high. We become like the cuckoo chick and the reed warbler.
Ah, yes. The classic example of brood parasitism.
Explain that one.
So the cuckoo chick, which is a parasite, has evolved these supernormal begging calls. They're so intense, so exaggerated, they sound like an entire starving brood of the host bird's own chicks.
The host being the little reed warbler.
Right. So the small reed warbler parents, driven by this powerful, evolved instinct to invest maximum energy in their offspring, They respond to this exaggerating call.
And they end up feeding this massive, unrelated parasite.
They exhaust themselves feeding it. It's profoundly maladaptive. The host parent invests all this life energy with zero reproductive fitness gain. It's often to the detriment of their own future ability to raise their own young.
So now, if you apply that mechanism to us, we're the host parent.
And the modern environment is just filled with cuckoo chicks, exploiting our primal wiring for profit or for attention.
That link is so critical. We're not just talking about food anymore. This idea of supernormal stimulation, it governs our behavior just as powerfully as it does for animals. It hijacks our urges for survival, for sex, for social connection.
The most direct human application is, of course, food and consumption.
Junk food.
Junk food is a perfect supernormal stimulus. It's designed to appeal to our ancient cravings for fat, sugar, and salt,
which were rare and vital nutrients in our ancestral environment.
They're incredibly rare and valuable. Now, hyperpalatable processed food exaggerates those nutrient inputs to the point where they are literally engineered to be irresistible. That's not a failure of your willpower. It's a failure of environmental design.
We've built an entire industry based on using food science to cheat our own internal regulators.
We have. And it extends way beyond food into our social lives, into how we seek validation.
Social media.
Absolutely. Think about it. The constant pings, the rapidly changing feeds, the exaggerated emotional responses you see, these are all supernormal social stimuli.
They're tapping into our deep, evolved need for group acceptance and status.
And they're offering instant, low-effort hits of validation that are much stronger than natural face-to-face social interaction, which often leads to more anxiety and isolation when you finally put the phone down.
And even our fundamental perception of beauty is shaped by this. The peak shift mechanism of SNS.
You see it so clearly in art and physical attraction. Historically, artistic portraits always exaggerate attractive features, bigger eyes, rounder lips, smoother skin.
Because those features are signals.
They signal robust health and fertility. This is why, in many studies, surgically augmented breasts are considered a supernormal stimulus. They offer an exaggerated artificial signal of maturity and fertility that can be judged as more attractive than natural breasts, regardless of size.
Even ancient art forms use this trick, like the contrapposto pose in classical sculpture.
Right, that intentional, unbalanced posture. It was designed specifically to exaggerate the desirable waist-to-hip ratio. It creates this powerful visual superstimulus that grabs your attention by emphasizing curves and flow.
So everywhere we look, from a Renaissance painting to a social media filter, we're being bombarded with these hyper-real stimuli designed to bypass our conscious mind
and trigger those deep, evolved preference mechanisms.
So if the external world is doing that, the modern work environment, with its constant connection and uncertainty, it's effectively a massive, complex, supernormal stimulus package that is always on.
It is. The modern workplace, which is characterized by this relentless connectivity and what we call algorithmic uncertainty.
What do you mean by that? Algorithmic uncertainty.
It's that feeling of always being watched, always being measured and judged by performance metrics or digital oversight you don't fully understand. It's a complex SNS that keeps the lizard part of your brain.
It's the survival engine.
Constantly hypervigilant because the environment feels unpredictable and deeply threatening, even if it isn't physically.
And this just puts our evolved drives on a disastrous collision course with reality.
It does. Our instinct, that optimal foraging theory, is to maximize energy gains while minimizing expenditure. Get the most bang for your buck.
But our work demands the opposite.
It demands relentless, non-physical energy expenditure. So that Slack message notification, it feels like a predator's rustle in the grass. The biological system responds in kind, and it leads to total exhaustion.
Because the continuous hypervigilance keeps us locked in survival mode.
And that initiates a really critical biological trade-off, one with profound, long-term consequences for our well-being and our ability to repair ourselves cognitively.
So if the Slack message is the fire alarm, what is the fire actually doing to the house?
That's the trade-off we're seeing play out inside that hypervigilant consultant in the cafe.
Okay, let's focus on that trade-off now, because this is where we shift from understanding the trigger to understanding the profound internal damage that happens because of this chronic activation.
Right. The system is forced to make an adaptive choice, but it's a choice made under duress.
So in these high-volatility labor markets, these environments of chronic stress,
the Stone Age brain prioritizes immediate survival over hedonic well-being every single time.
And this persistent state of defense, it creates something that in complex trauma theory is called an adaptive shift.
And an adaptive shift. And it's a shift where the system is working perfectly, but it's operating under a completely wrong set of priorities for long-term health.
Okay, what gets displaced?
The learning orientation, your capacity for curiosity, for growth, that gets immediately displaced by a myopic tunnel vision focus on immediate survival and defense.
The survival brain is just obsessively dedicated to anticipating, preventing, or protecting against potential damage.
From actual dangers or, more often, just perceived dangers. And this trade-off is so crucial to understand. A constantly defensive system limits the optimal biological resources you need for long-term growth.
For healing.
For rejuvenation, for learning, for self-development. All of that gets put on the back burner.
So if my body is constantly fighting the perceived tiger of a quarterly report, it literally can't allocate the resources to repair and restore itself.
It's a zero-sum game of energy allocation. The organism becomes locked in this biological trade-off between dealing with danger and facilitating growth.
Your brain and body resources are hijacked.
They're hijacked by defending against external threats. And that means you are profoundly limited in the cognitive and physical resources you have available for proper emotional regulation, for rejuvenation.
Your sleep suffers.
Sleep quality plummets, recovery is incomplete, and your capacity for complex creative problem solving just degrades over time.
And this constant state of hormonal dysregulation, this hyperreactivity to threats, it leads to these profound manifestations of breakdown, both psychologically and physically.
Which is a key characteristic of trauma exposure, even if the trauma is just chronic, unrelenting work stress.
So let's look at how this dysregulation actually shows up for people. What does it look like?
Well, the first is emotional and impulse dysregulation.
This sounds familiar.
It's characterized by extreme emotional reactions, often totally disproportionate to whatever the minor stimulus was. Your consultant's panic over a small market dip is a perfect example.
And what else?
People might suffer from an inability to tolerate being alone. It's often called abandonment terror because when you're alone, you're left exposed without any relational buffer against that internal chaos.
You just have your own thoughts.
And you experience these rapidly fluctuating emotional states. High anxiety 1 minute, deep depression the next.
What's happening on a physiological level to cause that kind of volatility?
The hormonal balance is just destroyed. Constant stress means overproduction of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. That leads to constant anxiety, hyperarousal, insomnia, panic attacks.
And at the same time.
Simultaneously, you get underproduction of other key hormones and neurotransmitters like serotonin, which reduces your system's natural brakes.
So you become more irritable, more impulsive.
Exactly. The internal volume dial is just permanently stuck on maximum, and it makes even minor, everyday events feel catastrophic.
It sounds like an internal engine just running itself into the ground. What about the physical toll? The phrase is always, the body keeps the score.
And it does. That's somatization. Chronic environmental stress forces the body to convert psychological distress into tangible physical complaints.
But complaints that often don't have a clear medical explanation when you go to the doctor.
Exactly. We're talking about persistent, debilitating headaches.
Yeah.
Chronic musculoskeletal pain that seems to move around your body. Irritable bowel syndrome, digestive disorders.
These are the direct biological consequences.
They are the consequences of that hormonal dysregulation and the perpetual hyperreactivity of your stress response system. It's as if the person has lost the language to articulate their overwhelming experiences, so these physical symptoms. They become this symbolic, persistent alarm clock, communicating that deep emotional pain.
And that high-cost emotional state, it must start to damage the way you see the world, your ability to function.
It does. That's captured in disturbances and meaning systems. Chronic stress fundamentally alters your worldview.
How so?
It can lead to a profound loss of belief that life has any meaning or purpose. Grief, deep shame, and overwhelming sense of hopelessness, they all set in. And it often spirals into clinical depression.
And this breakdown in meaning, it compromises your ability to solve problems.
It compromises your capacity for complex problem solving, for rational decision making, and critically, for making positive, lasting changes in your own life.
And the most central foundational damage is to your core sense of self, your identity.
This connects right back to that evolutionary fear of loss we talked about. The brain actually equates ego death.
Oh, you mean by ego death?
The fracturing of your identity. Adopting a fixed negative narrative like, I'm a failure or I am broken. The brain equates that with real physical death.
That seems extreme.
because historically, losing your status or becoming a liability to the group meant social ostracism. And for early humans, that was a virtual death sentence.
So to preserve survival, the brain will fiercely defend its existing identity.
Even a damaged, painful one.
Right.
The mind becomes hypervigilant for anything that concerns that negative narrative. It's confirmation bias weaponized against the self. And it makes those limiting beliefs extremely hard to break.
So we have a system that is stuck. It's in a high-cost, self-cannibalizing survival mode. The adaptive shift has happened. So how do we start to reverse that? How do we convince the brain through some kind of intentional structure that the tiger is finally gone?
We need a model of comprehensive change. One that is structured, intentional, and pure. This is the key. Fundamentally dialectical.
Dialectical, meaning it manages a paradox.
It manages the paradox of acceptance and change at the same time. And this brings us to dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and its foundational biosocial model.
The biosocial model. That sounds like the perfect encapsulation of this whole evolutionary mismatch framework. It's nature meets nurture.
It is. It's elegantly simple, but it's profoundly effective.
Yeah.
The biosocial model basically says that certain individuals are born with a biological genetic predisposition for emotional vulnerability.
That's the nature part.
That's nature. When this inherent vulnerability then interacts with an unstable or invalidating environment,
The nurture part, or lack thereof.
it leads to profound dysregulation and these destructive patterns of behavior. DBT steps in to untangle that knot by offering structure and skills to manage that inherent vulnerability.
And the 4 stages of DBT, they provide a really clear pathway out of that survival mode and towards self-actualization.
And the sequential nature of these stages is absolutely critical. You can't skip steps.
So stage 1, what's the focus?
Stage 1 is the most urgent and foundational. It focuses entirely on safety, crisis intervention, and behavioral control. The primary goal is just to get the worst problem behaviors.
Things like self-harm, addiction, suicidality.
Right. Or what are called therapy interfering behaviors, TIBs, to get those down and under control. As Marshall Linehan, the founder of DBT, said, an out-of-control existence is torturous.
So you can't work on the deeper emotional issues until you're stable.
It's impossible. Not until the client is committed to the process and has mastered critical skills like distress tolerance and immediate mindfulness.
So before we even talk about your feelings or your trauma, we teach you how not to burn the house down.
Precisely. You learn skills to survive intense emotional crises without making things worse. Once that critical foundation of behavioral and environmental control is established, then the system is stable enough to move to stage 2.
And stage 2 moves beyond just stabilization to address the core wounds.
This is where clients can safely start to explore past trauma, often the complex trauma of that chronic invalidation or environmental stress. They identify the maladaptive thoughts and beliefs that drive that negative identity narrative.
So the main goal is reducing traumatic stress.
It's the reduction of traumatic stress by increasing your ability to experience a whole variety of emotions without being overwhelmed or reverting back to those destructive behaviors. It's about accepting the facts of the trauma without letting those facts define your current identity.
And then stage 3 is the pivot point. It's the move toward normalization.
Stage 3 focuses on solving the problems of everyday living, improving happiness, sustaining that stabilization. The goal here is achieving ordinary happiness.
Not radical Zen.
Not radical Zen, just simple, functional contentment. The client is employed, they're maintaining relationships, they're stable, and they're starting to feel generally okay in their daily life. This is the successful transition out of crisis management.
But the truly strategic shift, the part that addresses the highest aspirations we have, that happens in stage 4, it takes us beyond just functioning.
Stage 4 is advanced DBT, and its goals are profoundly existential. The goal is to achieve and maintain an ongoing capacity for happiness and success.
And to move toward self-actualization.
Right. This stage isn't about fixing something that's broken. It's about generating a life that is truly worth living, moving beyond the mere absence of crisis or survival mode.
It's about building a meaningful identity that actively seeks growth and contribution.
And continuous self-improvement.
That transition from surviving to truly thriving, it feels like it requires us not only to master internal skills, but also to intentionally manipulate the environment around us.
It absolutely does.
If the world is delivering these supernormal stimuli that are keeping us stressed, we have to physically intervene in our environment.
Yes. We have to engage in strategic environmental recalibration. And we must start viewing work organizations as cultural adaptations.
Okay, what does that mean?
They're cultural adaptations designed to coordinate people to achieve goals. And cultural evolution can actively mitigate these evolutionary mismatches by intentionally redesigning workplaces to align with our adaptive human psychology.
So the solution isn't always internal, sometimes it's structural.
Often it's structural.
Yeah.
This intentional process is sometimes called Wilson's theory of cultural change.
And how does that work?
It starts by identifying a really clear goal like, say, reducing burnout or mitigating stress. And then you intentionally align the work environment to our evolved human preferences. It's about recognizing the biological user and designing systems that actually respect that biology.
One of the most powerful applications of this is in the physical design of the workplace itself, using concepts like biophilia.
Biophilia, which literally means love of life.
Right.
It acknowledges that our evolved psychology has this strong preference for cues in our environment that provide probabilistic information about resources and safety.
So ancestrally, nature meant resources. It meant safety. It meant shade.
And that explains the scientifically documented, measurable, positive effects of exposure to nature, even just simulated nature, on our mental and physical health.
So applying biophilia in a high-rise office building, it's not just aesthetic. It's not just about putting a few plants around.
It's a profound psychological intervention. It is intentional design. It means incorporating natural elements, maximizing exposure to sunlight, integrating plants, using natural textures, even installing high-quality nature imagery, all to make the environment more favorable for that Stone Age brain.
Because these elements of consciously signal safety and calm, they slow down that perpetual threat detector.
Exactly. And we also have to combat the fundamental physical mismatch of sedentary work.
We have to reintroduce those evolved bodily inputs.
We must. This means organizations implementing frequent mandatory breaks, encouraging walk-around policies, providing standing desks or even treadmill desks.
And just getting the body moving breaks that state of vigilance.
It breaks the continuous low-level vigilance that sitting for 8 hours enforces. That rigidity mimics being frozen in fear. Movement is often perceived by the deep brain as a successful escape.
Okay, that addresses the physical mismatch. We also have to align the cognitive and social environments to limit that feeling of constant hypervigilance, that algorithmic uncertainty we talked about.
And a major factor here is the use of electronic performance monitoring systems, EPMs.
These are the systems that track your keystrokes, your activity, how much time you spend on tasks.
Right. And while advocates will argue they boost productivity and accountability, the research is clear. They significantly increase employee stress, anxiety, burnout, and exhaustion.
The feeling of being relentlessly watched and quantified 24/7, it mimics a perpetual threat state.
It's essentially triggering the fear of being hunted. Intentional cultural change should radically restrict the use of these systems.
I can just hear a CEO pushing back on that right now, saying, we need EPM for efficiency, for accountability. The benefit is measurable productivity. So how do we justify restricting it? Is there any middle ground?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
EPM often delivers these short-term quantitative productivity bumps, but it comes at the expense of long-term employee health, retention, and creativity. Those are qualitative costs that are much harder to measure.
So what's the middle ground?
It lies in radically restricting monitoring to only what is necessary for regulatory compliance, ensuring complete transparency, and focusing on outcome-based metrics rather than continuous input surveillance.
So trust your employees.
When employees feel trusted, the cognitive energy they save from not being hypervigilant often offsets any perceived loss in monitoring gains. The Stone Age brain needs certainty and fairness, not surveillance.
On the flip side of that, are there some modern work structures that might actually align better with our evolved drives, that act as a natural nudge toward regulation?
That's where something like the gig economy can be appealing, at least to some individuals.
How so?
Well, for a specific subset of people, that structure appeals directly to the evolved mechanism for maximizing energy gains, that optimal foraging theory.
Because it offers a clear, direct link between effort and compensation. Input and output.
Exactly. It resonates with those ancient foraging strategies where your effort immediately translated into results. Unlike in large corporations where the connection between your input and your reward can be delayed by months or even years.
So some people choosing gig work might actually be mitigating a cognitive mismatch by finding that input-output clarity. Okay, so beyond environmental design, we need these profound psychological change mechanisms to shift the brain's focus.
And one core mechanism for moving past the survival brain is called mentalization.
Mentalization.
It's the capacity to understand yourself and others in context, to accurately perceive the emotions, the thoughts, the intentions behind behavior, to see behavior not just as an action, but as the result of a mental state.
That seems critical for moving from pure reactive instinct to a more reflective, effective response.
It creates the ability to pause between the stimulus and the response, and in that pause, to choose the most effective action. Roland May wrote about this idea of liberation. Human freedom isn't some innate state. It involves our capacity to create ourselves based on that reflective pause.
And mentalizing allows the brain to shift its default setting.
From reactive survival mode to reflective responsiveness. This capacity is often severely compromised in people who suffered attachment trauma because they never had that secure relational base they needed to learn about themselves and others safely.
Once that reflective space is opened up, the deeper mechanisms of recalibration can come into play. And this is where we see the advanced DBT concepts of willingness and acceptance.
Right. We shift the focus from fighting reality to embracing it. The DBT process works to move clients from stubborn willfulness,
which is that constant fighting of reality, the "it shouldn't be this way" mindset,
to willingness. Which means moving into action that actually embodies their chosen values. It's values-driven living, actively creating the life you wish to live.
And that willingness has to be converted into dedicated, continuous action.
Yes. In advanced stages, clients are no longer in treatment because they have to be. They're choosing to be there because they want to continue growing as human beings, striving toward that self-actualization.
So that deep internal commitment, that's a powerful mechanism of change in itself.
It is. It differentiates it from merely surviving or just stabilizing.
And then there's the profound concept of radical acceptance. And this isn't just passive resignation, is it?
Not at all. It's an active choice to acknowledge reality. Radical acceptance is acknowledging the facts of reality, including the painful facts, without judgment or trying to fight them.
And this includes accepting the full, messy scope of the human emotional experience.
It has to. If you expect to experience joy, you must accept that you're also going to experience sadness and anger and anxiety. Trying to fight those fundamental human emotions just limits your capacity for the good ones, because you're fighting your own biology. You're accepting the pain of the human condition.
And this must include a radical self-acceptance of your own inherent wiring.
Absolutely. A key area here is the acceptance of being what's called a highly sensitive person, or HSP.
An inherent emotional vulnerability.
Characterized by high sensitivity, emotional intensity, and a slow return to baseline after an emotional episode. Acceptance means recognizing this predisposition not as a flaw or a failure, but as an inherent characteristic, and then learning how to manage it.
So the goal shifts from trying to eliminate your sensitivity to learning how to shorten how often, how strongly, and how long those emotional spikes last.
Precisely. When clients stop projecting that sensitive, emotionally vulnerable part of themselves, and instead they learn to observe it, to validate it, and to work with it, they dramatically augment their capacity to regulate their emotions effectively.
And mitigating that frequency, intensity, and duration. That's a key marker of psychological growth.
It's shifting the adaptive system back toward health.
We've talked about skills, environmental design, acceptance, but the advanced literature seems to point to one mechanism that stands out as the single most significant driver of deeper, lasting change.
That's the therapeutic relationship itself. In the advanced stages of healing, it actually supersedes the mastery of any specific skill.
So the relationship is not just the context for the therapy.
It becomes a dynamic, lived laboratory that's developed over a long period of time. It provides a corrective emotional experience for clients whose trauma so often stems from relational failures in their past.
Why does the relationship become so uniquely central in that advanced stage, beyond just being supportive?
It's a relational mechanism that is rooted firmly in attachment theory. The relationship has to be strong enough to hold what therapists call ruptures and repairs.
Conflicts. Misunderstanding.
Exactly. And through navigating that inevitable conflict, that misunderstanding, and then reconciliation within a safe, non-judgmental space, clients gain new learning about relationships that aligns with attachment security.
They learn, maybe for the first time, what a secure, consistent base actually feels like in an interpersonal context.
And that deep relational learning allows for transformation that goes way beyond just mitigating symptoms.
Which means the therapist has to be using themselves intentionally. They're moving beyond just following a manual.
Yes. This is what's called the therapeutic use of self. The therapist consciously uses their own personality, their experiences, their knowledge, to create a connection and to model healthy functioning.
Modeling what a healthy, functioning adult looks like, especially when it comes to limits.
Right. Like modeling boundaries. The therapist has to find that dialectic between being flexible and being rigid. They have to be willing to bend for the client's unique needs, but also be rigid enough to maintain safety and consistency.
And they model that dance between their limits and the client's needs.
In an individualized way. And that teaches the client how to set and enforce their own healthy limits out in the world.
And demonstrating authenticity must make the process feel so much more real and achievable for the client.
Authenticity of self and judicious, appropriate self-disclosure are vital. They humanize the therapist. Clients appreciate a therapist who is real, who acknowledges their own life isn't pretty and perfect.
Someone who shows they are a genuine human being who has also navigated difficulty.
And that radically increases the client's faith in the possibility of their own change.
And the therapist holds the hope.
The therapist, having seen hundreds of clients move through those seemingly hopeless early stages, holds this great sense of belief in the treatment's capacity for profound transformation. This ability to instill hope creates an acknowledgement in the client. Holy hell, there's more to this. I'm not doomed to be this way forever.
And that empowers the client to move past merely existing.
And into actively creating and improving their life, moving from defense to evolution. The pervasive anxiety felt by the modern high performer, it's the inevitable, high-cost consequence of a brilliantly engineered survival system exposed to supernormal, chronic stressors, financial volatility, connectivity demands, algorithmic surveillance that just mimic the existential threats of the ancient world. The system isn't broken, it's just stuck in an eternally triggered state.
We've spent so much time optimizing for instant hedonic relief, for quick fixes, treating symptoms when our biological operating system actually demands strategic environmental recalibration, a radical acceptance of the full range of human emotion, and a dedicated values-driven focus on moving past survival mode toward lasting growth. The challenge isn't to silence the survival instinct that kept our species alive for millennia, but to construct a life and an environment that finally fully convinces that ancestral brain that the tiger is truly gone. This allows us to reallocate our vital energy, not to defense, but to self-actualization.